On March 10, 2010, Brooke Melton was driving her 2005 Chevrolet Cobalt on Highway 92 in Georgia. She was 29 years old. A pediatric nurse. No history of reckless driving. No drugs or alcohol in her system. At 6:47 p.m., her engine shut off. Her power steering failed. Her airbags didn't deploy. She hydroplaned into oncoming traffic and was killed instantly. Police ruled it driver error. But Brooke's parents didn't accept that answer. What they found would expose a cover-up that lasted 13 years, a defect General Motors knew about since 2001. And a death toll that reached at least 124 people. This is the GM ignition switch scandal. And this is the Unsettled. Between 2003 and 2011, General Motors manufactured and sold millions of compact cars. The Chevrolet Cobalt. The Pontiac G5. The Saturn Ion. The Chevrolet HHR. These cars had one thing in common, a defective ignition switch. Here's how it worked. The ignition switch is a simple mechanism. You turn your key, it stays in the run position, your car operates normally. But in these GM models, the ignition switch was designed with a detent plunger, a small spring-loaded component that keeps the key in position. The problem? The detent plunger had insufficient torque. That's engineer speak for, it was too weak. If you had a heavy keychain, or you hit a bump, or your knee brushed the key, the ignition could slip from run to accessory or even off. When that happened, 3 catastrophic failures occurred simultaneously. 1. Your engine shut off. 2. Your power steering failed. 3. Your airbags were disabled. You were suddenly driving a 2-ton metal coffin with no control and no protection. And General Motors knew about this defect before the first car ever left the factory floor. Let's establish exactly what GM knew, and when they knew it. 2001, pre-production testing. Engineers at GM test the ignition switch for the Chevrolet Cobalt. Internal documents show the switch failed to meet GM's own specifications. The torque was measured at 10 Newton-centimeters. GM's minimum standard. 20 Newton-centimeters. The switch was approved anyway. Why? Cost. Replacing the switch would cost 57 cents per car. 57 cents. 2004, first warranty claims. Customers begin reporting problems. Engines shutting off while driving. Keys moving out of position. GM's internal database logs these complaints under the category, engine stall. No recall is issued. 2005, first confirmed death. On July 29, 2005, 16-year-old Amber Marie Rose is driving her 2005 Chevrolet Cobalt in Maryland. Her ignition switch fails. The engine cuts out. She loses control. The crash is violent. Her airbags do not deploy. Amber dies at the scene. Her death certificate lists the cause as blunt force trauma. GM is notified of the crash through their warranty claim system. No recall is issued. 2006, GM investigates itself. Internal engineer John Hendler writes in an email, "This is a safety issue." GM forms a committee to review the problem. On April 26, 2006, that committee decides against a recall. The reason given in internal documents, tooling costs and effectiveness of the fix are not favorable. Translation, it would cost too much money. 2007, the secret fix. Here's where it gets criminal. In 2006, GM engineer Ray DiGiorgio authorizes a redesign of the ignition switch. The new switch meets safety specifications. It works. But here's the problem, GM installs this new switch in 2007 models, without telling anyone. No announcement. No recall of the old defective models. No new part number assigned. This is critical. By not changing the part number, GM made it nearly impossible for investigators to trace the defect. When asked about this in a 2014 congressional hearing, DiGiorgio invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination.
More than a decade ago,
let me tell you about some of the people who died because of this. Brooke Melton, March 10, 2010. 29 years old. Pediatric nurse. Killed in Georgia when her 2005 Cobalt's ignition failed. Her parents, Ken and Beth Melton, hired engineer Mark Hood to investigate the crash. Hood bought a used Cobalt, replicated the conditions, and proved the ignition switch was defective. The Meltons sued GM. During discovery, they uncovered internal documents proving GM knew about the defect. GM settled the case quietly in 2013 for an undisclosed amount, with a gag order attached. But the Meltons had already shared the documents with safety regulators. Michael Carabin, age 15. Killed in 2010 when the Saturn Ion he was a passenger in suddenly lost power and crashed into a tree. Airbags did not deploy. Amy Raidmaker, age 24. Killed in 2006 in her Chevrolet Cobalt. The ignition switch failed during highway driving. Her car crossed into oncoming traffic. She died on impact. Her airbags did not deploy. Jean Macaulay Erickson, age 18. Killed in 2004 in her Chevrolet Cobalt. First confirmed victim of the defect. Airbags did not deploy. These aren't just statistics. These were teenagers driving to school. Parents driving home from work. Nurses saving lives in hospitals. And every single one of them died because General Motors decided 57 cents per car was too expensive. So where was the government? Where was the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, the agency responsible for forcing recalls? Between 2003 and 2014, NHTSA received hundreds of complaints about GM ignition switches. They opened investigations in 2007 and closed them without action. Why? Because GM kept telling them the crashes were caused by driver error, distracted driving, inexperienced drivers. And NHTSA believed them. Or didn't care to push further. Here's what a 2015 Congressional report found. Quote, NHTSA failed to probe deeply, failed to demand answers from GM, and failed to connect the dots between crashes that had a clear pattern. Even when independent engineers like Mark Hood provided proof of the defect in 2013, it took NHTSA another year to act. February 2014, the recall. On February 7, 2014, 13 years after the defect was first identified, GM finally issues a recall. 780,000 vehicles. But here's the thing, GM only admits to 13 deaths. 13. Internal documents would later reveal they knew about 124 confirmed deaths, and suspected many more. Congressional hearing, April 2014.
Again, I can't answer specific questions at that point in time. That's why we're doing a full and complete investigation. Today's GM will do the right
CEO Mary Barra is called to testify before Congress. Senator Richard Blumenthal asks her directly, did anyone at GM lose their job over this? Her answer, not yet. Eventually, GM fires 15 employees. Not one of them is ever criminally charged. So what happened to General Motors? The criminal case. In 2015, the U.S. Department of Justice announces a settlement with GM. GM agrees to pay a $900 million fine. In exchange, the company avoids criminal prosecution. No executives go to jail. No one is held personally accountable. $900 million sounds like a lot, until you realize GM's revenue that year was $155 billion. The fine represented 0.58% of their annual revenue. Less than 1%. The Victim Compensation Fund. GM creates a victim compensation fund, administered by attorney Kenneth Feinberg. Families of the deceased can claim compensation, but only if they waive their right to sue. The fund ultimately pays out $595 million to 124 death claims and 275 injury claims. That's an average of $1.5 million per death. Put another way, GM valued each human life at the cost of 3 mid-tier sedans. The stock price. In February 2014, when the scandal breaks, GM stock drops to $34.49 per share. By December 2014, it's back to $36.12. The market didn't care. Where are they now? Ray DeGiorgio, the engineer who approved the defective switch and later secretly changed it without documentation, took the Fifth Amendment in congressional hearings. He was fired by GM in 2014. Never charged with a crime. Mary Barra remains CEO of General Motors as of 2024. Her 2023 compensation package was $28.98 million. The families of the victims. Most accepted the settlement. Some are still fighting in civil court. Brooke Melton's parents, Ken and Beth, became advocates for auto safety reform. They've spent the last decade pushing for stricter regulations. But the system that failed their daughter hasn't fundamentally changed. 124 confirmed deaths. 275 injuries. 13 years of cover-up. A fine that amounted to a rounding error. No one in prison. This is what happens when corporations are allowed to calculate the cost of human life against the cost of a recall. This is what happens when regulatory agencies fail to do their job. This is what happens when justice is denied. If you know of a case like this, a cover-up, a system failure, a crime that authorities won't investigate, send it to us. Our email is in the description. Every case deserves attention. Every victim deserves a voice. This is The Unsettled. Subscribe for the next investigation. And remember their names.